Welcome, everybody, to the November Meetings of Minds. And it feels like it's been a little while because it's been at least 2 months since we were last joined together. So I hope you are well. I know there are people here with us from all around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever it is that you are literally zooming in from. And given that this month actually housed the International World Diabetes Day, which was on Tuesday the 14th, we thought we would harness the interest, as we should do more often. In reality, we should capture that interest around type 2 diabetes, and in fact, all of the associated issues that there are that either lead up to or are a consequence of type 2 diabetes. But we thought now is the best time to focus that energy, focus that attention on what is a critical global health issue. You know, the fact is I'm going to bring up some slides. I'm just going to give you advance warning. This is a bit more of one of those more kind of scholarly, academic, scientific kind of meetings of minds, because there's a lot to go into. But as always, I hope to do that in a way to create clarity, to really, I do want to shock you a little bit. I want to make you aware of just how much of a burden this problem is, and actually how much of an increasing burden this problem is going to become. But I also want to cut through the noise, and I want to be able to show you how we can be really effective in preventing it, avoiding it, and so much better at successfully managing it, particularly type 2 diabetes, if it's something that ourselves or a person we know is dealing with. And also in the context of recognizing so many people in the world are what we call pre-diabetic. Now, I'm going to come back to this a lot, the notion of testing, because if you're not testing, you are guessing. And why wouldn't you test? If there is a lack of clarity, if there is a lack of understanding or awareness around the health issue, and you have an opportunity to lift the lid, to take a look inside and go, okay, does this affect me? Is this something right now I need to be more serious and more proactive about? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that? This is the thing I find most fascinating about health when it comes to how we manage ourselves and how we care for those people around us, is why would anybody willfully turn a blind eye when you have the opportunity to look at it and go, okay, that's where I'm at. This is what I need to do. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's fear. Maybe people don't want to know because it sounds so severe, so scary, so worrying. If that's the case, then I really hope that this time we have together today is going to give you confidence and actually make you far more bold and brave, and recognize that actually you possess the power to manage this situation so effectively. You can either prevent it, particularly type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle condition. Prevent it. That's the best thing. Take the test. Are you good now? Brilliant. Stay that way. They're the most powerful tests, I promise you. They're the ones that people dismiss. They go, I took the test and everything was great. Brilliant. That's the best thing. Great. So now you have the full opportunity to not go down that route. But if you do the test and you realize that you are higher up the scale, potentially pre-diabetic, or if you already know you are type 2 diabetic, then I hope that what we go through today is going to show you two things. One, you can 100% reverse pre-diabetes. It is not a sentence. You are not committed to the rest of that journey. If you take a test and you realize you're higher up and you're potentially pre-diabetic, that's great news as well, because now it's time to hit the brakes and stop the rest of it from happening. It is not inevitable. And if you are type 2 diabetic, okay, let's manage the symptoms better. Let's have it so that your quality of life is not interrupted by living with that disease. Let's manage it so well that you have an optimized nutritional health status that enables you to live life to the full, to embrace life, and not be defined by a disease. So it's all good. Knowledge is power. Knowledge empowers you to do something powerful. It puts you forward. It allows you to be the captain of your own destiny. And so I'm going to bring up some slides. This is a bit more like my kind of academic role, where we're more kind of teach-led. So take out a pen, piece of paper, a notebook, however it is that you do, take some notes. Feel free to take pictures of the slides, because there's lots of information. I don't often do slides this way anymore, not for you good people. Obviously, when I'm at the university and I'm doing some teaching, we have to spend a lot of time in data and graphs and that kind of content. But I don't think that has a huge value with the real world. We can get lost in that, but there is a bit of that today. So feel free to take pictures, screenshot, but take notes, because all of my years of academic study and learning how to learn and teaching has convinced me there is a power to the connectivity of the mind through the pen or pencil to the page. When we commit those words to the page ourselves, we are consolidating our understanding. It's a neurological device that literally carves into the neocortex, into those cortex columns, the information that you need to retain. And you'll have it in your own language. One of the best things about making your own notes is you write it for you, so you will have it in your own language. So whilst I bring up the slides, get yourself ready to study the screen. It's a bit of a different one today. I have warned you, giving you full disclosure. And let's go through. HbA1c, which is the test, the HbA1c test, and beyond, because the test is just the start. The test is where we find out where we're at and what's going to be our course of action. Is it to maintain? Is it to bolster down? Be really good at what we're doing and maintain this? Can we make some improvements? If we're pre-diabetic, what do we need to change? Now's the time to reverse it, take it seriously. And if we're type 2, now we know, we may have known before, let's manage that better to live a more optimized health life. So let's look at some of the background, because this is the kind of stuff, again, I don't ever say anything to invoke fear. I don't believe that fear is a great motivator in any context, but this really gives us a harsh reality of where things are at in the world. And type 2 diabetes is already recognized globally and defined as a pandemic. And that's because of the rate and impact, the rate at which it's affecting populations, but also its rate of growth. Now, it's not infectious. You can't catch it off somebody, but there's a different type of infectious or infectiousness about type 2 diabetes. And it's about mindset. It's about what we permit, and by permitting, what we condone. So this attitude of, really being slack about our food choices and really being slack about our levels of activity. This enables this, and this creates cultures of it. And often the reason why people don't see the need or the impulse to do anything different is because they look around them and everybody in their network is doing a similar type of thing to them. So there's no pressure bound upon them, because they go, well, surely this is normal. And so it's not infectious. You won't get it if somebody coughs in your vicinity. You won't get it if somebody sweats next to you. But you will get it if everything around you normalizes it and says, this is just typical. This is how things are. And so there are an estimated 422 million individuals affected by type 2 diabetes currently. This corresponds to 6.28% of the world's population. There's a lot of information on these slides. I'm not going to read all of it, but I do want to draw your attention to some of these ones that lead us into the conversation. Pre-diabetes is estimated that by 2045, which is just around the corner in real terms, the prevalence will increase to 8.3% of the global adult population, and equivalent to an estimated 587 million people. Currently, right now, 38% of all adults in the North America and the USA have pre-diabetes. And pre-diabetes itself is what we call a gateway condition. So it leads on to other things. Not only is it a fast track towards the full development of type 2 diabetes, but also it means you have more pronounced risk of other types of non-communicable disease. So it's it's in itself, it's not just a case of, well, I'm in a holding room. You know, I'm okay here. This isn't great, but it's not bad. It's in itself, it's a compromise to health, and it's a compromise to your quality of life. It's classed as a global pandemic and a gateway disease. So think about that. Think about that. If you are high on the scale, if you have pre-diabetes, then you've opened the door to other more severe consequences. A lot of information on this slide. And I'm going to draw your attention just to a couple, actually, because these are the ones that really fascinate me. So right now, 4.4% of those who are dealing with type 2 diabetes are aged between the age 15 to 49. What isn't represented here is the younger age group up towards 15. And I find that fascinating, that there's a limitation on the access to information around that area, because we know that actually up until 2002 here in the United Kingdom, there wasn't a single incident of a child being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And now the rate at which they're being diagnosed is increasing year on year. And I'm about to say something that's really unpopular, but it's really, really true. Children developing type 2 diabetes, children under the age of 15, 16 developing type 2 diabetes is a responsibility of the parents. We need to parent more proactively. We don't need to be their best friend. We need to be their parent. We need to make choices on behalf of their health outcomes and not bow to peer pressure or demands. And that irritates me a lot. And often when I'm doing live events and speaking to people, and whether it's part of a health strategy agenda or something that I'm working on, when parents approach me and go, but what do I do when my child is asking for this? Let's say it's just a really packed full of sugar breakfast cereal. You know, they really want it. What do I do when they say they want it? Say no. Be a parent. Say no. Because, you know, a monkey convinced the world that chocolate was a good thing to have for breakfast. This is crazy. What a mindset. You've got to be stronger than that. And so when it comes to the statistics that impact on children, that to me should be the real harsh awakening. Wow, we're letting this happen to our children. Never mind our own health responsibility for ourselves, but come on, we've got to invest in the next generations, the lives we've brought into the world. We've got to be stronger than that. Prevalence at the moment, I'm going to draw your attention to this because there's two aspects of it. Prevalence at the moment is a rate of 6,059 cases per 100,000. But it's estimated, if you look further down the list here, that the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is projected to reach 7,079 individuals per 100,000 by 2030. That's just around the corner. That's an exceptional rate of increase. The burden of diabetes is rising globally, much faster rate in developed regions. So isn't this bizarre? That typically a disease, if you have a look here, that is more associated to areas where there is economic depravity, where people are less well off economically, you typically see increased rates of type 2 diabetes. But at the same time, the wealthiest nations in the world, Western Europe, North America, Australia, all these places, and as places become more affluent, you see an increase in the rate of type 2 diabetes. So what does that tell us? It tells us everything about the industrial markets of food and the industrial markets of messaging in those regions as they roll out. And so this is really something that we need to take stock of, because this is the real part of the problem. It's the foods that we have access to and the messaging around those foods. It's really, really complex. It's interwoven and it's all around us. So it's normalized again. And just a moment ago, I discussed this. I talked about this notion that people often lack the incentive to change because they look around and they go, well, this is what everyone does. Everybody just sits on the couch and watches television all day long, or uses their free time to do that. Everybody has a largely sedentary job. Everybody eats this type of food. You know, nobody I know eats that type of food. So that we get what's called normalized behavior. But all around us, we have a normalized attitude about food that is playing its part in sparing this pandemic forwards. Gender distribution is equal. Why wouldn't it be? Because it's a lifestyle disease. And we just see that all across, over 1 million deaths per year are attributed to diabetes alone, all of which preventable. To me, this is where we start to really sober up and recognize that there are deaths, there are mortalities that are completely avoidable just by adopting a more health-centric outlook and making some simple changes. That's the key bit. Make some simple changes. In 2019, it was estimated that 1.5 million deaths were directly caused by diabetes. And here's the key bit now. Here's how we start to move forward. Yes, there was another 2 million deaths attributed to high glucose in 2012. So you might say, well, things are getting better. No, one's actually diabetes, the other one's just high glucose, which in itself is a gateway disease. So you can be at that point there, that pre-diabetes, not type 2 diabetes, and you can develop a catalog of other consequences. But here's the good stuff. A healthy diet, let's hope someone defines that one day. Regular physical activity, maintaining a normal body weight, avoiding tobacco. These are the ways to prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes. But I promise you now, and you can share this quote with anyone you ever meet, from the highest ranking consultant, surgeon, head of whatever health institute, all the way across to your own doctor. If we do these things well, it's not about delaying them, it's about preventing them. We can change the statistics. We can buck the trend. We don't need to walk into this. If we make more positive food choices, if we have a really good strategy around what we eat. And that's not about perfection. Perfection doesn't exist. It's about just making better options more often, things that contribute towards our health status. If we move more, we are made to move. We're a migratory species. And when we move, it's not about burning calories. Forget all that nonsense. When we move, particularly when we look at the context of type 2 diabetes, we bring about relief for the digestive system. We direct energy away from the endocrine system, and that relaxation, that offloading the burden from the endocrine system enables it to actually galvanize, be stronger. That respite works really well. Also, we're talking about glycemic control, so sugar control, and more physical activity and exercise really bolsters that system of controlling sugar. So it's not about burning calories. It's not about all that kind of nonsense. It's literally about better food choices that don't aggravate the system, activity that actually takes the load off the system, allows the system to recover, to repair, and to function more effectively, and actually activity that increases the sensitivity to sugar so the glycemic control is optimized. That's it in simple terms. Diabetes can be treated and its consequences avoided or delayed with diet and everything I've mentioned. And obviously there are medications for it. And there comes a point, unfortunately, in the trajectory of type 2 diabetes where a person, if they are type 2 diabetic, will need to look at what medication is available to them and how they're going to use that as a part of a strategy as they move forward. However, more and more of the research is going to show that you can manage the symptoms and the condition by adopting a healthier diet with more frequent and consistent physical activity and having some meaningful exercise behavior. So you don't need to surrender yourself to anything or any way that you want to live. You can actually live on your own terms. But for sure, for somebody who is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, medication is going to play a part, and the longer term strategy could be to work away from that medication, be medication free, and manage that condition through dietary measures, physical activity, and exercise, which I think is hugely powerful. So it comes back to this test, the HbA1c. So it's glycated, sugared hemoglobin. So sugar is, and I know there are people who greatly dislike me saying this, but sugar is a toxin. Your daily need for refined sugar is 0. You don't need refined sugar. Your body has no demand for it whatsoever. And it's toxic, and the body knows this. And the reason why the body responds, and you see this big insulin spike, which actually brings about a big plummet, which drives the appetite. So the spike in blood sugar and insulin is the body's response to this toxicity. The plummet then, well, this is actually determined by how high the spike was. And then this plummet, this is actually the window whereby the mechanism that drives a person to overconsume and to consume too many calories, and therefore gain weight that they don't want and go from overweight to obesity. And this in itself spares type 2 diabetes along. It's this plummet, often dismissed, not considered enough. It's actually this fall that brings that part about. And so this real pronounced curvature of activity works against us. And like most things, over time, we can exhaust it. So what happens when the sugar binds to the molecule? So we have this, we can measure this within the HbA1c test. We can measure how much sugar is attached to the hemoglobin. The body can't use that sugar properly, so it sticks to those cells, it builds up in the blood, and they're active for around 2 to 3 months. Now, we have what's called the balance test, which is a blood lipid profile test. And there's a similarity to that, because this is a kind of retrospective. It's a 3-month analysis. And as a lot of you will know, red blood cells themselves have approximately a 120-day life cycle. So when we measure something over that 2 to 3 month period, what we're getting an insight of is an indication of how you are most of the time. If it was a more homeostatic measure, if it was something that we just measured that day to see what you'd done that day and how that was influencing these kind of systems, well, that'd be far more what we call acute, short-lived. It wouldn't tell us much about how you are. It would just tell us about what you've done today. But the HbA1c test, well, it counts us for all that time. So it's a real world snapshot of how you've been living your life for those 3 months. As somebody who's conducted hundreds, if not thousands, of one-to-one nutritional assessments, both within a hospital and within high performance sport and within general health, I know that most people, whenever they hand over their food diary or whenever you do an assessment, they'll say, that's not how I always am. That's not how I typically am. That's just because I had to go to a birthday party on that Friday and it was their anniversary and we had this event at work. And every time, people always hand you over the information with the whole excuse. Oh no, this isn't normal. It is. Let's just get real. It is. And it's certainly been normal for you over the past 3 months. So if they're not a normal 3 months, wow, what an amazing 3 months you've had. Maybe it's time to take a break from that rock star life. But let's just get real with ourselves. Let's just be really, really honest and go, yeah, okay, let's take the measure. That's how I've been living. How is that influencing me? What does that suggest? What can I do differently and what can I do better? A high HbA1c means a person has too much sugar in their blood. And this means that they are more likely to develop diabetes complications. And that has itself, if we just look at diabetes itself as a condition, you can develop problems with your eyes, with your feet, you start to have compromised, vascular return. There are all kinds of issues that are purely related to the condition itself. And so it's never too late to make a change, and it's never too soon to test. So I promise you now that across the board, doesn't matter what the test is. I say this a lot to people all around the world. If you feel good today, if you feel great, brilliant, let's keep that. Let's work to keeping that. So let's measure it. Let's see where that's at. Let's see what those parameters are. And then we've got a reference point. This is our go-to reference point. This is where we want to stay, because this is us when we're feeling well, when everything's great. And that enables you to track the change over time. And if things change, measure, see what's going on, and see if those changes you've encountered. For instance, bear with me a minute. If you have been generally making really good food choices, physical activity is good, you're out every day, let's say you're getting those 10,000 steps per day, you exercise 3 or 4 times a week, everything's good. And then, for whatever reason, you have that crazy 3 months that I get told about a lot. And your food choices aren't so good, your physical activity drops, you don't go and exercise very much, maybe once in a while. And you take the test then and you go, wow, look at that change. Look at this change in status. So I've done a test when everything felt great and they were my values. And I've lived these 3 months now where I've not been so kind of on it. I haven't owned the situation, been less active, haven't made the best food choices. And look at the change. And it could be a small change, but a small change in the wrong direction. And then you know how sensitive you are to these kind of challenges. So it's always good information. It's always a good insight. There is never a right or a wrong time to test. Just test. Find out where you're at. Are you in a position that you feel great and you want to maintain? Or do you have a sense that actually things could be better? And this could be the stark insight that you need to spur you on to do things better. So we know the benefit. You can learn about where you're at, and then you're empowered to do something about it, to lower that back down. You should check regularly. It may come as no surprise to you as a researcher and a scientist that I would encourage you to check parameters really regularly. Certainly HbA1c, and certainly HbA1c if you need to bring about some changes. It's really good to track progress or track change. So let's imagine now that you've done an initial test and you're quite high. Let's say you're in the pre-diabetic category. And so you implement some changes. You start to think about those food choices. You start to move more, develop a bit of an exercise routine. 3 months later, you test again. You can then measure the impact those changes are having. What impact are your actions having on your health? Has it started to move the needle into the right direction? And if it has, brilliant. Carry on. Measure in another 3 months and see how far the needle has changed again. But let's say you do a test, you implement some changes, and 3 months later, there hasn't been any movement. It's the same. And often people will say, if that happens, well, listen, I started to do this and I cut down on that and I was eating more leafy greens and I started to do more activity and I started some exercise and nothing's changed. And I consistently say the same thing. It may have taken you 5, 10, 15, 20 years to get to where you are now. And for you to have done that test and see that you were quite high up and needed to make some changes. And now you've invested 3 months of positive change. You've started to lay your foundation. And actually, if it hasn't changed, that in itself can be seen as a positive because it's no longer getting any worse. So great, that's a win. That's a win if it hasn't changed. What happens though if for the same scenario, you've made those positive changes, you measure 3 months later, and it's got a little bit worse? That shows you the systemic nature of what was building up. And actually, the question for someone like me is always, well, how much more worse would it have been had you not started to make some changes? because the test itself is really objective. The test is looking at physiology, it's looking at biochemistry, it's telling you how things are. So around that, all we can do is start to consider what would be the other potential outcomes here. What else could have stacked up and taken place had I not started to make positive change? The fact is, for most people, the biggest population of people, the minute they start to bring about a positive change, they start to see a positive result. But we measure tens of thousands of people. If you look at the balance test, we measured over 1 million people. When you measure it on that kind of scale, then you're getting every kind of feedback. You're getting every kind of insight to all those individual variations. So I want you to be aware of that, so that if that impacts on you or someone you know, you have a better way of interpreting that and understanding that and starting to put a more meaningful context around it and go, okay, great. Again, we're still going to keep to those positive changes, but we've got no reason to expect this to be a quick fix. This is going to take a little bit of time. We've got to be consistent. And we are the outcome of the things that we do most often. Consistency is always key. And sometimes things take time. It's one of those measures that's considered as a vital annual check. But most healthcare systems only offer this test once a year. So at best, the average person, if they go and consult with their doctor all around the world, may have access to this test once a year. In some areas, they'll have to pay for that. That's just the way it goes. But for me, we miss the opportunity of a critical insight if we only wait every year, because we can bring about changes to this every 2 to 3 months. And particularly if we are looking at bringing about a change that's going to reduce the score, if we're going to go from pre-diabetes, or if we're going to go from type 2 diabetes and bring it down to base level, we want to check more often. We want to check in and check that what we're doing is having an impact and is starting to move the needle in the right direction. So let's delve into a few things now. Let's delve into a few things of areas whereby we can affect some change. There is an emerging evidence and compelling research reaching almost consensus point that links gut microbiota changes and health to the risk and the development of type 2 diabetes. And we know this anyway. I promise you now, and you can quote me on this, if I'm speaking to you in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, we will have just sat back and watched all of that research pour forward about how the gut is central to the vast majority of our health consequences, outcomes, and interactions. But we see it clearly here. And that makes perfect sense, because we're looking at alterations within factors that relate to absorption, interaction of food within that space, and therefore aspects of insulin response, hormonal activity, and glycemic control. And so the gut, how well primed the gut is to manage this and to manage the pathogenesis of the condition, is a prime indicator. And so what we need to draw our attention back to is this notion of, well, how do we care for the gut? And we know that we should be addressing the gut on a daily basis with prebiotic, dietary fibers. We should be making sure that that's a consistent part of our food regime. But again, when you start to look at the epidemiology and when you look across societies where type 2 diabetes is more manifest, what we actually see is that lower quality food, lower in nutrients, higher in energy, and those types of foods that interact negatively within the gut microbiota space typify the highest incidence of type 2 diabetes. So we want to address the gut. But also, and I'll come on to this in a moment, it's recognizing that things like phytonutrients and polyphenols and omega-3 all have a prebiotic effect. They all feed and nurture the gut. They all play a role in reducing systemic, or what often people call chronic inflammation, or silent inflammation, people call it. but they have a positive role in reducing those factors. But they also have a really positive role in nurturing the good bacteria, encouraging them to flourish. And remember, the gut microbiota, your microbiota and mine, it's more similar to your thumbprint than any other kind of human facet. And what I mean by that is it's unique. Your gut microbiota is a unique expression of you. The gut microbiota is established up until around about the age 4, and then it's pretty much locked in. And then our gut health is far more derived of the choices we make, the types of foods that we consume, that we prioritize, and actually the foods that we avoid. And so when we start to re-navigate the person towards a diet that's getting at least 25 to 30 grams of those dietary fibers every single day, when we get someone to increase their polyphenol, their antioxidants, so they're getting plenty of antioxidant-rich foods into the system, polyphenols, omega-3s, then we encourage the gut to flourish, and we encourage a gut that is far better control over glycemic control. Let's look into a little bit of supplementation. Maybe I should have spent a bit more time looking at supplementation when it comes to a prebiotic, because the challenge of people consuming a sufficient amount of dietary fiber is again becoming global. On average, it's reported that typically people have less than 50% of the daily recommendation. At the same time, we see a whole host of issues that are increasing in rate day on day, week on week. Things like IBS and other factors that directly are associated with the gut itself, and then the manifestation of other types of lifestyle conditions off the back of that. And so I would encourage you to do so. If you can't achieve that dietary fiber intake through your diet, those leafy greens, a rich rainbow array of fruits and vegetables, then you should supplement. Because, and I think I've said this once, maybe twice, even just today, consistency is key. You get far more back by investing daily. And so to make sure that you have enough each and every day, supplement can play such a huge part. But actually, one of the key areas that we've encouraged supplementation on as health professionals for decades, that only really came into the spotlight from 2020, is vitamin D. But we know actually, though, that vitamin D also is strongly hypothesized to reduce the risk of and actually reverse the incidence of type 2 diabetes. A lot of observational studies have observed an inverse relationship. So when there is a sufficient amount of vitamin D, we get lower incidence of type 2 diabetes. And so this makes perfect sense. Anybody who has any understanding of the biochemical pathological implications of vitamin D, the role it plays in immune function, will actually appreciate immediately the logic to this, that when there is a sufficient amount of vitamin D, those endocrine responses, those absorptive responses, digestive responses, and immunological responses are sufficiently equipped in order for them to fulfill the biochemical pathway to initiate and activate in the terms of how they need to respond, prompt insulin, manage the profile of the curve, and back to normality. Where there's a deficiency, there is a delay or a breakdown in communication, and that allows things to go wrong. Whenever it comes to biology, we're not really in a good place if we're creating space, because the process of communication with regards to biology and biochemistry is so finely tuned that actually bringing about delays typically leads to poor outcomes. And in fact, in no instance does it lead to a good outcome. So I want to draw your attention to this study, which is Pitt Acetal 2020. And the conclusion really, and the recommendation from that paper is a really good study. To D or not to D, whether or not to supplement, what the prevention strategy was. And the conclusion of the author here is, even if the risk reduction with vitamin D supplementation may appear relatively small, when applied to the expanding pre-diabetes population, it can have important health implications. And I think this is often overlooked when we look at research, whereby we can see something that has something of an effect within a research cohort, which in itself can be quite small in real terms. What we have to consider, we're talking now about populations of millions of people that this has a potential impact on. And even the millions beyond those that currently fit into one of the boxes that would classify them as pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. So when we consider it from that point of view, and we see that when there is a sufficient amount of vitamin D available, we have a lower incidence or a reversal of circumstances around the HbA1c. So we see a better outcome. When we magnify that out across all those millions of lives, and that whenever we discuss health, never forget we're talking about the lives of real people. When we draw that out across all those millions of people, and we know the critical role vitamin D plays just in the general maintenance of health, it actually just becomes a no-brainer. You go, yes, if this plays even the smallest part in preventing or reducing the risk, then it plays a key part. And actually, like most things, it's a sum of parts. So I want you to go back now and think, well, what are the cornerstones of a good diet? A good diet is diverse in its nutritional provision. It actually has a food matrix. So once we bite into it, the mouth recognizes it and sends a signal to the gut in order for it to receive it. It provides a sufficient amount of vitamins and minerals that are circulating so the body can make use of them as and when it needs to draw them down. And that's how really intelligent supplements work. You provide a synergistic, sufficiently amount of key vitamins and minerals so that they are circulating and the body can draw them down. It's a very, very nuanced, clever part of a strategy. You ensure that there are sufficient amounts there so the body can make use of it and call upon it when needed. So if you look at those component parts, we address the dietary fibers, the prebiotics. We make sure that a key nutrient implicated in immunological response is in place. You're starting to build up a series of events that positions you differently with regards to your nutritional health. You start to nurture the gut. You start to support the normal function of the immune system. And so you start to change the parameters. You start to change the environment that, if left unchecked, would lend itself towards desensitizing with regards to insulin and losing its glycemic control. You keep priming the system. You keep the system intact. And how do we know what we're doing? Because we test. We go back and we can check how much all of this is working. So let's have a look at those omega-3s and how they work on it. So elevated triglyceride levels are a common dyslipidemic feature accompanying type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetic states. And so we know that omega-3 has consistently been shown to reduce the amounts of circulating triglycerides. And we also know, and the research is abound, that omega-3 itself functions as a prebiotic. So it feeds the gut space. So it reduces those blood triglyceride levels, helps to enhance a healthy ratio of cholesterol, the LDL versus the HDL. And so we are literally changing about those blood components, which are themselves indicators and markers of the likelihood to develop other types of non-communicable disease. And in fact, given that type 2 diabetes is a gateway disease, it's hard to have a conversation about it and not discuss cardiovascular disease, because it's really common and it's a high risk factor that's associated with type 2 diabetes. So here we can see, well, what's the mechanism that reduces the risk and reverses the condition? We reduce the triglycerides, We establish a better ratio and relationship of the HDL and the LDL, and all the while, the omega-3 is nurturing and feeding the gut microbiota. Powerful stuff. Sometimes people say to me, okay, you've got the HbA1c test, but do you have a product? Do you have something that works in that space? And I go, take your pick. We have vitamin D. We have prebiotic. We have those dietary fibers. We have omega-3. And all of these things, when you look, the research abound, play such a measurable, positive role in the management of and the reduction of type 2 diabetes. I think it's worth our time spending a little bit of time on this. And this is the adipocytokines. And these are mediators of insulin resistance. And I'm going to discuss this briefly, but in the context of weight and weight gain. Because, again, it's an area where as societies, we've become rather passive about it. And we know that actually being overweight and increased body weight, body fat, and obesity are themselves increased risk markers for the development of type 2 diabetes, as well as other types of non-communicable disease. All too often, people think of that as a passive status. So they will think that, okay, I'm overweight, but that's it. I'm just carrying a bit too much weight, and I will be better for losing it. But this is not true. And actually, as we increase our adiposity, our body fat, we start to bring about some really negative biochemical changes and alterations. And one of them is the role of these adipocytokines and their function. And there is a hormone called leptin, and leptin works in relationship with ghrelin. Leptin is a hormone that checks your adiposity, your body weight, and is a part of what actually tells you to stop eating. It contributes towards the management of your appetite. When is enough enough? Ghrelin, on the other hand, is the hunger hormone, the one that drives you on to consume more. And we know that energy metabolism and glucose and lipid metabolism, things like reproduction and cardiovascular function and immunity, these are influenced by the activity of these adipocytokines. But as we gain weight, there's a dysregulation. So we start to disconnect the system. And leptin, if we go back to leptin, as we gain weight and we start to become overweight and obese, we lose the signal from leptin. So the system that will tap the brakes and tell us to stop eating becomes blunted, less and less effective. All the while, a lot of the foods that are associated with overconsumption, if we look at ultra-processed foods, they are stimulating ghrelin to increase our appetite. So we start to have this perfect storm. The hormone that is helping us to regulate appetite and keep a sense check of our adiposity is becoming less and less effective, whilst the hormone that drives our appetite and encourages us to overconsume is starting to become dominant. And we also know that these adipocytokines play a huge part and have an influence over other organs and systems, and the brain, even how we think, are influenced by these. And there have been numerous studies that have shown the negative cognitive impact and how difficult choice making becomes as we become overweight and obese and start to deal with type 2 diabetes. And by the way, you don't need to be overweight or obese to have type 2 diabetes. It's not they're not stepping stones. You can jump a few, you can go straight to type 2. And then the activity of these adipocytokines is the same, bringing about disturbance, challenges to cognitive function, and compromise to other organ systems. Lots of research has looked at the addictive challenges that are abound to food orientation as people gain weight, and once a person is dealing with pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And we know that a part of the challenge, or a part of the problem, is a change in functionality of these adipocytokines. And so it's in our best interest to manage our weight. Always maintaining a healthy weight for life for life is one of the key drivers of maintaining health. But how we manage that weight is everything. Quality is way more important than quantity. And as we start to reorientate our food ideas towards more whole foods, more nutritious foods, less reliance on ultra-processed foods that are just high in calories, low in nutrition, actually we start to so powerfully bring about such a change in our health status that it cannot be overstated. It's singularly the most profound action you can take. But I'm a great believer in add before you subtract. Your relationship with food is profound. It's really difficult because a lot of those foods themselves are quite addictive. So rather than deal with that part of the problem, address this. Start to give this what it needs. That starts with those dietary fibers. That starts with making sure you have enough vitamin D. That is built upon by looking at your omega-3 status. You're working towards a whole systemic change of hormonal and cytokine activity that repositions your health and starts to move you away meaningfully from pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and whatever they're a gateway towards. Your nutritional attitude and behavior shapes your health. If you've never heard that before, you've heard it now. So we can manage all of these factors. It can be controlled through improvement in, as reported by Sami et al., a patient's dietary knowledge, attitude, and practices. Knowledge is power. So the more you understand about something, the more empowered you are to do something about it. But it can be overcomplicated, and there's a lot of noise out there around the aspects of food and food supplementation. And I like to keep things really, really simple. Start proactively with the positive steps. Introduce the prebiotic. Do a vitamin D test. See what your vitamin D status is. But most importantly, in this context, do the HbA1c test. Test. Don't guess. See where you're at. And never let your attitude get in the way of your outcomes. Sometimes the hardest changes is getting past ourselves and being able to go, maybe I've not been doing things as well as I thought I was or could. Maybe when I see all these adverts for all these other things, maybe they don't have my best interest at heart. Maybe what they have at heart is the bottom line and the sales they want to generate off pushing those products forward. Maybe I need to just embrace the day, embrace whatever weather is waiting for me outside, put on a coat and a good pair of shoes and go and walk 10,000 steps. Maybe you're going to walk 2,500 at a time and you're going to get outside 4 times a day. Maybe you just need to find that exercise you love and not try and become the best at it, but just do it because you love it, because you know it brings about so many verifiable health benefits. It's this attitude. It's the top, what we call in sport, the top 2 inches. If you can change this, you can change anything. But as I've just said, there are compromises to that. As we start to go further down that spiral of poor health, there are literally physiological, biochemical things that are working against us, that are actually consolidating how negatively we think about things. And we have to break the cycle. And sometimes the best thing in the world is just cold honesty, a really brutal insight to the reality of a situation. How do we achieve that? Take a test. Just do the test. Have a look. Check the marker. If you can, why wouldn't you? I often get asked in my role, whether it's in health or sports performance or when we're looking at agendas, you know, why would I do this? And my question is always, why wouldn't you? It's available to you. You live in the 21st century. You have an access to the power of information that previous generations could only dream of. Why wouldn't you do that? And why wouldn't you want to embrace this life and live as well as you possibly can? Health is not about being scared of the worst. Health is about being enthusiastic for the best. being able to live well for as long as you possibly can and match your health span to your lifespan. I want you to all live long, but only if living long means you live well. Because my greatest wish for everyone, and even for myself, is to live well. Enjoy it. Be here to experience it, take it all on board, live every moment. Top 2 inches. Change our attitude. And by changing our attitude, we can change our practices. Because where I would disagree with the statement here by Sami et al. Is that just knowing is not enough. Knowledge is a part of it for sure. You have to know what to do. More importantly, you need to have a support network that can show you what to do, that you can go back to, you can ask questions on, that are reliable, that are well informed, that are up to date, and that are agile, that are prepared to change their status based on the weight of new evidence. But you've got to be able to take it on, do something different, and then turn that into your practice. And this is integral. I think it's really simple. I think we could change the health of the world through simple practices. And I am convinced that if we all tackle type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, by doing so, we will stop so many other things. Never take your attention away from the fact that this is a gateway disease. So let's shut the gate. Let's slam that gate closed. Let's stop it now. Let's see this as the warning sign it is. Take positive action to do something different about it, and then prevent a ton of unknowns. And in the meantime, enable people to live better. There's a ton of references that are available to you. Please take a photograph, go and have a read up in your own time. And each of these papers will lead you on to at least 20, 30 other papers. So if you have an interest in the research aspect of what we've covered today, delve deeper, go have a read. And you can probably find most of these via Google Scholar search engine. So please do that. The key thing, though, that I want you to do, the key thing that I really want you to focus on is action. It's all very well to know, but it's far more profound to do. Do the test. Encourage the people in your community, in your network, to do the test, to have a look, to interpret it, to understand it, and to manage it. It should be something that I'd say at the very least is engaged with twice a year. Optimally, you would check this at least 3 times a year. And then for those who are in a position where they need to measure and track a change because they may be pre-diabetic or on that type 2 diabetes scale, 4 times a year. Keep yourself accountable. Track the improvements, track the change, and then benefit from the changes that you're tracking. None of us need to walk into type 2 diabetes. None of us at all. We could literally change the health status of the world if we all just focused on this. And what's implicated in it is everything that we already do. So, thank you for being here. I know it's not my typical presentation style. There's been a lot of slides. There's been a lot of information. There's been a lot of talk about research. We've delved a little bit into physiology and biochemistry. But sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to just go a little bit deeper. And I think for us, this is a conversation that keeps coming round and going round. It's a space that we're passionate about, that we intend to do more about. And so I hope that all of you people will join us on that mission to do more about it, to help more people, and literally just one person at a time, change what health means on a global scale. And so until next time, that's the close of this Meetings of Minds. It's actually just been one mind. It's been mine, but it hasn't really, because as always in everything we do, I've accessed the research of tons of amazing people who are out there working in the trenches, producing these insights so that we can all benefit from it. And obviously, as always, I am representing the whole product team and Zinzino in general, who are on a mission to bring about such a powerful change in this space. So my mind has reflected the minds of so many other people who are far more important in all of this than me. But I've got the gift of the talk, apparently. And so that's why I am here conveying it. So thank you. Be well, stay well, do well, look after each other, and we will see you at the next Meetings of Minds.